Good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon and welcome. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 74th Annual AAPOR Conference here in Toronto. As someone who grew up just down the 401 over in Michigan, visited Canada many times, and still talks a little bit like an ice fisherman, I'm really glad that we've come back here. Many of us have been coming to this conference for years, even decades, but not everyone has. The veterans among us know our values, our goals as an association, but some folks will be learning that for the first time this week. And for those of you who are new to AAPOR, welcome. We're really glad that you've joined us because what we as a field need to accomplish is as important as it's ever been. As this opening plenary will demonstrate, the public needs information it can trust, and it needs that information measured well. The challenges we face collecting accurate data are incredibly daunting, but this week is an opportunity for us to learn from each other, celebrate our successes, reflect on our setbacks, and try to move our field forward. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to the sponsors for your tremendous support of AAPOR. Now, I'm honored to introduce the moderator of our opening plenary, Peter Miller. Dr. Miller recently retired from the U.S. Census Bureau, where he held several positions, most recently serving as Senior Researcher for Survey Measurement. Peter is Professor Emeritus at Northwestern University and is one of the most influential AAPOR members of the last quarter century. He was Editor-in-Chief of our flagship journal for 8 years. Then he went on to serve as president and spurred the creation of the Transparency Initiative, which now has 95 participating organizations. Please welcome Peter Miller.
So how did Andrew Mercer win that student paper award? No, I shouldn't ask that. No, that's for later. Thank you for coming this afternoon. This will be a very interesting session, and I'm happy to introduce our three distinguished speakers. I'm just going to go through the introductions now, and then I'm not going to jump back up in between so that they can just come up after each one is finished. Each speaker will go for 20 minutes, and we'll start questions from the audience between 3 and 3:30. So the first speaker on a panel today is Patrice Mathieu. He's the Assistant Director in Methodology branch at Statistics Canada. He joined Statistics Canada about 20 years ago. He started working on the census in Canada in 2010. He's now responsible for all methodological aspects of the census in Canada. He has bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Montreal. And Patrice is going to review the operations and the experience of the Canadian census, particularly focusing on 2016. Patrice, welcome. Thank you for coming. Oh yes, I want to introduce everybody else. Thank you so much. Shall I go ahead? All right. So James Treat. Jim Treat is the Assistant Director for Decennial Programs at the United States Census Bureau. He's responsible for program management and operational management for the census and for the American Community Survey. He's been working at the census for over 30 years, and from 1990 through the 2010 census. He has a bachelor's degree from the State University of New York and a master's in survey methodology from the joint program. Jim is going to discuss 2020 census operations. Dee Sunshine Hillygus, the final speaker, is Professor of Political Science and Public Policy at Duke. She's the director of the Duke Initiative on Survey Methodology. She served for 6 years on the Scientific Advisory Committee for Census And she's a co-author of a book on the 2000 census called The Hard Count, a very interesting book. She has a PhD from Stanford. And Sunshine is going to talk about the political context of the 2020 census in the United States. So now, Patrice.
Okay, so thank you. I would like to thank the organizers first for inviting Statistics Canada to this very interesting session and for giving us the opportunity to share with you our experience. And being from Canada, I'd like to welcome all of you from south of the border to Canada, and hope you'll enjoy your stay in this great city. So, my slides up. Is there anything I need to do? Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay. I think it's always smart to start a presentation with a quotation from an eminent statistician, especially I think if he's in the room. I think he's in the room. So here are two quotations from Don Dillman. The history of surveying over the last 7 years has involved significant transitions from the dominance of in-person interviews to heavy reliance on voice telephone methods, and now to online and mixed mode surveys. We are now in an era of tailored design. And to stay in the same line of thought, a quotation from a less eminent statistician. A one-size-fits-all solution is now outdated. Respondents, even millions, must have the opportunity to respond at the time of their choice, in the manner of their choice. But the good thing is we can control and we can influence these choices. And when they do so, we need to know about it right away. But thanks to technology, it is now possible. And this is what the Canadian census is all about. So technology affects conducting a census in many ways. The first that comes to mind is internet collection, but it's more than that. It also allows for a multi-mode collection approach with a very sharp integrated collection strategy. And in addition, it allows for to have systems and processes for monitoring progress and collection, to assign workload and manage the workforce, to predict volumes, to process data, to disseminate data. Just to give an idea of what we're talking about, the next census in Canada is May 11th, 2021. The last one was in 2016, so our census is every 5 years. We have a multi-mode collection approach. Self-response starts at the beginning of May for about 1 month, actually for the entire collection period until the end of July, but mostly in May. And then in June, we start non-response follow-up in the field. Non-response follow-up mostly in person, but also over the phone. About 10% of our follow-up is done by phone. We're the second largest country in the world in terms of territory, but in terms of population, we enumerated in 2016 35 million people. The majority of the population is concentrated in urban areas, mostly in the south. We like to stay close to our friends in the US, and we're not stupid, it's cold up there. So, but the majority of the territory is rural or remote areas, but there are people everywhere, so we have to count them as well. And we have special enumeration procedures for collective dwellings, what we call collective dwellings here. It's called the group quarters in the US, or Aboriginal communities, we call them reserves or remote areas. So some highlights from our 2016 census. Our collection response rate was 98.4%. Our internet collection rate was 68.3%, and our self-response rate was 88.8%. So about 10% of the workload was completed by interview during the non-response follow-up phase. The workload at the start of non-response follow-up was 3.7 million, which was actually less than what we anticipated. Of course, the field staff is not just completing questionnaires, they are also determining the status of the dwelling, so actually the workload is, that's why the workload is higher than just the 10% of questionnaires completed. There's a lot of vacant dwellings that are identified by field staff during that operation. So we're proud of our 98.4% collection rate. We're proud of our 88.8% as well, but we're more proud of the trend. So if we look at the numbers here, in 2001, the self-response to the Canadian census was 75.6%, and 15 years later, it was 88.8%. And I'm sure in this room, I don't have to convince you that it's not because respondents are more willing to answer surveys. So the biggest contributor to this success is our WAVE methodology. So it's the approach we're using to remind Canadians to fill out their census form at specific times throughout the entire collection period. So it increases self-response while encouraging households to respond by internet. So basically, the idea of our WAVE methodology is at wave 1, we mail out an invitation letter to the households without a direct opportunity to complete a paper questionnaire. But there is in the letter a phone number where the respondents can call to request a paper questionnaire as well. So that's our way to, yes, increase the internet response, but also keep a good self-response. And as the returns from wave 1 start declining, we send a reminder. So that's about 1 week after wave 1, we send a wave 2 reminder. And as the returns from wave 2 start declining, we send a questionnaire package. And then after that, non-response follow-up, our wave 4 is non-response follow-up. And all that, the first 3 waves take place over a bit less than 1 month. So this is pretty much what I just said. The top line is what I just described. This is what we do in what we call our mail-out areas. It's areas where we have a good list of addresses where our postal service in Canada, Canada Post, can deliver the material. We still have some areas in the country, we call them the list and leave areas, where we have to send field enumerators to list the dwellings and drop questionnaire packages. So that was for about 18% of the country, or 16% of the country in 2016. It's going to be a bit less in 2021. So that's our WAVE methodology. So the use of internet as a mode of response to the census is not new. It actually started in 2001. We had a small test conducted in Montreal and in Toronto where we got about 5% and 4% of response by internet in these 2 sites. But we introduced it at large for all the dwellings in Canada in 2006. But it was a passive offer, so the secure access code and the link to the website was printed on the paper questionnaire, but everybody was still receiving a paper questionnaire. That generated about 18% internet response rate. We were a little bit more aggressive in 2011. We introduced our WAVE methodology for the first time. So for about 75% of the mail-out dwellings, we sent a letter at wave 1 instead of a paper questionnaire. We kept 25% of the most difficult dwellings where the internet connectivity was lower. We thought it was safer to keep our good old method for these dwellings. So we sent letters to only 75% of the dwellings. And that gave us 53.8% internet response rate in 2011. So in 2016, we actually did the test in 2011. And even in these difficult areas, the strategy, the combination letter, reminder letter, questionnaire package generated more self-response. So we sent invitation letters to all dwellings in the mail-out areas, and that generated an internet response rate of 68.3. And we're again improving for 2021. We'll send the same letter to all the dwellings, but we are increasing our mail-out areas from 82% to about 88%, so that should increase our internet rate. And we're also testing, actually right now in our census test, dropping off letters instead of questionnaire packages in our list leave areas. So we'll see how it goes, but if it works, it would also increase our internet rate. Okay. I want to show you this slide just to show that, yes, over the last 20 years, the accessibility to internet has increased and people are using more internet for anything. But the reason why we're having these rates is because of the way we contact the dwellings. The first table is an example from our 2011 census. We did a live test where for comparables dwellings, instead of sending a letter, we sent a questionnaire. We just wanted to see how respondents would react. And when we were sending a questionnaire, the internet rate was 32% instead of 71.6 in the areas for the dwellings where we mailed a letter. And again, these dwellings these two groups were comparable the way we tested it. So it's really what mattered the most is how we contact the respondents. Same thing, another example from 2016, we see that in our mail-out areas where we mailed a letter, the internet rate is much higher. And we're seeing the same trend in our 2019 census test right now. So how can all this be possible? So I talked about the wave methodology. So to make that happen, we need an efficient way to produce these reminder letters and questionnaire packages, and we need an automated way to enable Canadians to call for a paper questionnaire. But it has to be aligned with a very with a communication strategy that follows the wave methodology. And even more important, behind the scene, there's a lot going on. We have a lot of systems to monitor and to manage and to plan all this complex collection methodology. So, as I said, we need a cost-effective way to mail out a planned 15 million Wave 1 letters and 9 million Wave 2 reminder letters without knowing in advance to who we're going to send it for the Wave 2 and Wave 3. So these waves are what we call on-demand. So what we decided to use is what we call a self-mailer. Basically, it's one piece of paper folded, glued on the side. And so it eliminates the requirements for a separate envelope, no insertion step required, environmentally friendly. But it's also considered a more official presentation to public. When we do our tests between censuses and we talk to our respondents, they tell us that when they receive that in the mail, it's not something they normally receive, so it stands out and they know it's official. And you'll see on the next slide, this is what it looks like. And it looks plain and boring on purpose because people receive that and they know it's not junk mail, they know it's the census, so they complete it. Everything in that letter has been tested, every single word. Should we use education instead of schools? We tested it, things like that. What made a big difference between 2011 and 2016, just the deadline we put in 2011, please respond within 10 days. And in 2016, we put please respond by May 10th. And it made a huge difference. We got a huge peak of response on May 10th. So like everything matters in this letter, and that's one of we spend a lot of effort on that to make sure that it's the most, and of course there are two columns because we have two official languages, so everything has to be bilingual. So, and as I said, it has to be aligned with the communication strategy. This is examples from 2016. We were everywhere. Like in the middle, I think it's Union Station, it's the subway station here. We took over the subway station and census was everywhere. We had Post-it on the Metro newspaper. It's something that is distributed at the subway station or bus stops. So we had Post-it saying that, okay, today the to-do list is to do the census. That guy on the right is someone known in Canada. So we were everywhere, all types of social media, newspapers, everything. and it has to be aligned with the messages in our wave material. So basically, wave 1, we're telling respondent, okay, it's census time, please do it by May 11th in 2021. It's quick, easy, it's secure, and here are the reasons why you should do it. So we have a more friendly approach, I would say. But then wave 2, we say, okay, it's not too late, so do it. And it's the law, so complete it, it's the law. And so it's not as much as why you should do it, but it's, no, do it, but it's not too late. And then wave 3, we go to the next level. So we say, okay, final notice, complete your census, it's the law, so do it today. And there will be consequences, there could be consequences for not answering. And then after that, we start non-response follow-up in the field. So here I just want to focus on, so in addition to that, so that what I described is more the national message, if I can say. But on top of that, we did segmentation analysis. We put emphasis on targeting the message for different groups of population. And actually, we came up with, for 2021, 88 clusters grouped in 12 meta-clusters where we adjust the message. So everybody's getting the same message at the top, but then we refine and we make the message specific to different groups. For some people, if you tell them that like, the completing the census is good for their community, that won't make them answer the census. But if you tell them they have to do it, it's the law, then they would respond. So that's the kind of things we're doing with this segmentation approach. So quickly, behind the scene, so that's what I just said is what's visible, but behind the scene we have systems, we have processes. So just gonna go quickly through all the systems we have in place. First of all, we need to plan. If we want to send reminder letters and all that, we need to know the volumes. We need to know after the self-response period, how many cases we'll have left for the field enumerators. So we came up with what we call a wave model that tells us all that, so we can plan all the activities, all the volumes, how many questionnaires we need to print. In addition, we need what we call a master control system. So it's basically a list of addresses. So actually, even before that, we need a list of addresses. So we have our address register at Statistics Canada, was implemented in the 90s, but we keep updating it with admin source, with listing, Google Maps, things like that. So we have our list of addresses, and our master control system gives us for each dwelling the status of the dwellings, if the dwelling responded, if we followed up, how many attempts, things like that. And we have our collection management system. In 2016, we introduced a new corporate tool at Statistics Canada, the Integrated Collection and Operation System. So it's a unique portal for all collection users, so including respondents when they go online to complete their questionnaire. It's that system that they use, but also for our field staff. And mainly for the field staff, the portion they're using is what we call the collection management portal. It's where they can get their assignments. And it's important in a multi-mode context that all these modes talk to each other, because we don't want to follow up on a dwelling that has responded by internet the day before. So that system allows us for that efficient management. For supervisors, they can assign their work to their staff, and they can monitor their progress. The census enumerator can submit their pay claims in that system. And for managers, we can monitor the progress and make decisions. And I talked about our wave model to make projections and for planning, but we also use it during the operations for forecasting and to see if we're on track, and to see if we continue at that pace, will we finish on time, or do we need to make decisions to stop collecting data in specific areas, to reallocate the staff elsewhere. So we're using our wave model as well for that. So towards 2021 and 2026, so every census we improve and we add new things. Our next big change, or at least something we are we're investing in right now, is the use of administrative data, either to replace response from respondents, or to help during non-response follow-up, or to determine the occupancy status of the dwellings. Instead of visiting dwellings to determine a dwelling is vacant, we could maybe use administrative data for that. As I said, we want to expand our mail-out areas and reduce the amount of paper we use. So we have a few initiatives about that. So that's pretty much what I had to say today. Thank you.
Okay, waiting for the slides to load. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about conducting the 2020 census in the digital age. It's truly a very exciting and busy time for us at the Census Bureau. So using technology has transformed the way the census has, and the government as a whole is interfaced with the public. The census goes as far back as the UNIVAC, when we were processing and tabulating, leveraging technology for the 1950 census, population census, and the 1954 economic census. The UNIVAC 1 was the first successful civilian computer that was a key part of the dawn of the computer age. We continue to leverage technology to increase the accuracy, increase efficiency, and connect with the population, along with putting data into the public's hands in a more available and easy way. In the 2010 census, we used GPS-enabled handheld devices to update address list, collecting GPS coordinates for every structure. The data was transferred and processed electronically. We eliminated paper, increased efficiency, and improved the accuracy of our eventual data tabulations. As you'll hear more in the slides on the 2020 census and our plans for a numerator-assisted automated data collection, automated payroll for our field staff, an electronic applications process using digital media, reusing administrative data, the internet data collection, and data dissemination. Use of technology has shaped expectations regarding the mode of response, security of the data, access to information, and ease of use. So for this presentation, in the 2020 census, we're implementing new technologies to make things easier than ever before to respond to the census. For the first time, everyone will have be able to respond online, by phone, or completing a paper form and returning that by mail. The data that the public, we will use the data that the public has already provided to reduce field visits. We're building an accurate address list, automating our field data collection operations while keeping the information confidential and safe. The focus of today's presentation is on the 2020 census design, its inclusion of the internet response, how self-response strategies consider hard to count or hard to reach populations, and how the 2020 census design will leverage administrative data. Before I get started, just a brief reminder of the purpose of the census is to conduct an enumeration of the population and housing and to disseminate the results to the President, the states, and the American people. It's mandated in Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. The primary goal is for the apportion the representatives among the states in the House of Representatives, but we also use it for other purposes, drawing congressional and state legislative districts, school districts, and voting precincts. It's used every year to allocate more than $675 billion in funding to the states and local communities. It helps inform decisions at government levels every day, and it provides business and nonprofit data to help them make good decisions about their work. The environment that we sit in includes changing technology, mobile population, complex living arrangements. All of those influence our ability to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. And that's our tagline associated with the census. The 2020 census will be conducted in a rapidly changing world, requiring continuous improvements on our part. And it is harder and more expensive to enumerate our population. Decade after decade, we must devote additional thoughts and efforts understanding the environment and the potential impacts on counting the population, along with the hard-to-count populations continue to be and are an ongoing effort. We need to make it easier, safer, and more secure. The Census Bureau has effectively moved the decennial census in the 21st century by leveraging existing technologies to automate multiple operations and thereby increasing efficiencies throughout. On this slide, you'll see the 4 innovation areas that have been the focus of the research and design throughout the decade. The first one is re-engineering our address list development activities, changing the way we build our address list. Optimizing self-response, making it quick, easy, and safe for everyone to respond, using administrative data and third-party data, and then re-engineering our field operations by using technology to be more efficient in what we do. This slide provides a snapshot of how we conduct the census. It's the arc diagram that we call, and it's in the simplest form. It lays out how we go about counting everyone once, only once, and in the right place. The first thing we do is we establish where to count through our address list development operations. We want to motivate people to respond and provide them opportunities to do that in multiple modes and in multiple languages. We also are concerned about enumerating populations that don't live in traditional housing units, which we call group quarters, and providing those people the opportunity to be included in the census. And then for the portion of the population that choose not to self-respond, to follow up them, and then finally through the tabulation and the release of the information. For the 2020 census, our estimated 12-year life cycle cost is $15.6 billion. We started doing work in 2012, and we will continue out through 2023. Diving a little bit into detail on establishing where to count, we conduct a 100% review and update of our national address list. We're using laptops to verify addresses in the field, building upon the use of handheld devices for address listing from the last census. In addition, we're using geospatial imagery to review the national address, and we were able to verify about 70% of the addresses in our data centers that significantly reduced the need to go out in the field and canvass all 11.2 million blocks. So we've reduced our field work substantially. In addition, we have multiple data sources that have identified areas where the address changes are happening, and such as information that comes from the United States Postal Service. And in addition, we have a strong partnership with local governments through our local updating of a census address program, which we refer to as LUCA. As so far, we've received responses from governments representing 95% of our housing inventory in the United States. We are also using technology to help in delineating our areas for enumeration and specifically making decisions about where we use a procedure we call update leave, where we update the address list and leave questionnaires at the door during the self-response phase of the program. We do this in areas where they have poor address delivery coverage by the Postal Service, or in situations where there might be natural disasters. For example, the Puerto Rico island suffered Hurricane Maria a couple of years ago, and it was partially mail out, mail back, basically, or self-response, and then update leave. We've converted the entire island over to update leave because of the impact on the address frame. Moving into motivating respondents, people to respond, there are two primary areas that we are focusing in on. First, the nationwide communication and partnership campaign that we conduct. We're building on the successes of using paid advertising and audience segmentation from recent censuses. We're communicating about the census based on advanced modeling techniques to increase awareness and self-response in identified areas where we would have concerns. And in addition to the traditional print and broadcast media advertising, for the first time, we're going to be able to focus our advertising through digital advertising, which is a new form of communication for this census. The second piece is probably even more important. It's about motivating people to respond by providing safe, secure environment and systems for them to submit their personal information and communicate it to them about their information being safe and confidential. We ensure that respondent data are safe through the Census Bureau's culture of data stewardship. We take that to heart every day. What we have is a comprehensive program that ensures that information that's collected is encrypted securely on devices, and when it's at rest, we've also transmit data through once we've collected it, we transmit it immediately in a secure environment. And in addition, we have inside the Census Bureau's firewall, we have procedures that protect the data along with our disclosure methodologies for ensuring that we don't release any information about individuals. We have a comprehensive approach to maintaining data security, which includes partnerships with the Department of Homeland Security, the tech industry, and the intelligence community to help us in defending our systems. All our systems are tested for security well before they're deployed. There's a layered approach, advanced tools that are used to defend against threats. We encrypt, as I said before, our data at all stages on devices in transit and at rest on our systems. And we're constantly monitoring the systems to ensure that any attacks that occur are not breaking through our procedures. Moving on to self-response. This is the area where we encourage people to respond online as our primary mode. We also provide options for them to complete their census questionnaire by telephone or by using a paper questionnaire. And the next couple slides, I'm going to walk through some more details on this. I know this is a very busy slide, but I would have you focus in on the table at the bottom of the slide. The very left-hand side of it is the two panels that we have. The first is called Internet First. The second is Internet Choice. We have columns, 5 mailings that represent our mailings. For the Internet First panels or components, they receive an invitation along with the census ID to complete their form online. They do not get a paper questionnaire in the first mailing. For the Internet Choice option, they do get a paper questionnaire along with the invitation to complete their forms online. The first 2 mailings go to everybody. The third, fourth, and fifth mailings only go to non-responding units. And in the fourth mailing, if you haven't responded, you'll get a paper questionnaire along with the invitation to complete the form. We have a staggered schedule here because of trying to equalize the workloads over the course of the census to help with our questionnaire assistance, telephone questionnaire assistance program, as well as our data processing activities. Any address that does not respond by early May will be in our workload for non-response follow-up, which I'm going to talk about in the upcoming slides. So this slide shows basically the percent of housing units and how they're going to be enumerated. About 95% of the housing units will be in the mailing stream where we have the post office deliver the questionnaires and all the mailing materials as outlined on the slide before. And then in addition, about almost 5% of the housing units are in areas that I talked about, the update leave operation, where we don't have good addresses that the post office can deliver to. And so what we do is census field staff go out, they deliver the questionnaires and leave them at the door along with updating the address frame. And then for less than 1% of the housing units, we actually just go out and enumerate those housing units. Those are typically very rural areas of the country, sections of remote Alaska, for example, and areas in upper Maine are examples where we just go out once and try to get the enumeration. The important thing here to look at is that over 99% of the housing units are provided the opportunity to complete their form with a census ID as their initial main primary contact. We are hoping to see that our self-response rate at the start of the non-response follow-up operation, which is May 13th, which was a year ago Monday, out from Monday, would be 60.5%. That breaks down into about 40.6 percentage points coming in from internet, 15.6 percentage points coming in from paper, and about 4.3 percentage points coming in through the telephone self-response phase. This is a snapshot of our internet application when you go to complete the form online. The thing you should notice is that in the there's an area to enter your 12-digit ID. Then you hit the login button. You go in and you complete your census questionnaire. But for those people who either don't have their ID or never got an ID, they can go in by clicking the link below the login, which says to complete it without an ID. They enter into the application. We collect, in addition to the demographic information, we collect the address information so that we can match that back to our address frame and link that response up to the case, up to the housing unit, and with hopes to be able to remove the self-response from non-response follow-up prior to the start. But one of the great things about non-responses is we can pull cases out of non-response in near real time as self-responses do come in. So moving on to the group quarters operation, these are areas where people live or stay in a group living situation. Typically, they're owned or managed by an entity, and there's sometimes services that are provided. Examples of group quarters are nursing facilities, college or university, dormitories. It could be also correctional facilities. Our biggest innovation here is that we are taking electronic records from these facilities if they don't want to complete the form, the paper version of the form. So they can do an electronic transfer of their data to the Census Bureau, and we'll use that. If they don't want to, we'll still use our normal collection methodologies of a paper questionnaire. Moving on to non-response follow-up. This is the area that has a lot of innovation going on with it. This is the first time we're going to use a full-scale smartphone technology to capture responses in the field. We're taking advantage of automation and how we efficiently manage and route on the ground the staff by showing them the correct or the best way to canvass or to work their workloads. In addition, we're relying on automation to collect and manage payroll information, to manage their work, the ability to be more effective with case assignments, automated determination of the optimal travel routes, as I said before, and to reduce, as a result of this, to reduce the number of field offices that we have to stand up. In 2010, we've had about 500 field offices. We're going to be opening 248, almost half as many as what we had in 2010. In addition, we are partnering to use administrative data from the Postal Service, the IRS, the Social Security Administration, and other agencies to help us in identifying vacant and non-existing units that may be in our frame so that we can remove those cases from the non-response follow-up workload. And then in addition, we are going to be using that information when we can't get an enumeration to actually use the administrative data for collection for cases that go into non-response. I want to stress here that we are only doing that when we have a high confidence, a level of confidence that the data is accurate and complete and that it doesn't impact the census. As we prepare, I'm sure you're all aware that there's a bit of a discussion around the content on the questionnaire which has to do with citizenship, which could have an impact on our self-response rates and therefore our non-response follow-up operation. We are prepared for that. We have contingencies built in the program, but we are also conducting a test very shortly, a national census test, to assess the impact on self-response rates as a result of citizenship. We're going to be implementing a sample of cases where we're going to have a questionnaire with and without citizenship and determine what the impact on the self-response rates. Information from that study will inform our recruiting and hiring activities for the 2020 Census non-response follow-up operation, as well as our communications outreach program. And then lastly, we have integrated technology into our tabulation and releasing of our products by making it creating more flexible tools that allow data users to look at data in visualization ways, easier access, easier searching. And with that, thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I have to admit, I'm a little bit of the odd man out. I've never worked in a statistical agency, and truthfully, most of my research doesn't really use census products. I do other types of surveys, although everything I do, like most survey people, gets benchmarked to the census, and so certainly can speak to the importance of the Census Bureau. But I was eager to join the CSAC, the Census Scientific Advisory Committee, when Bob Groves invited me, and I spent 6 years on that committee as the lone political scientist. I did spend quite a bit of my time often saying, we need to think about politics, right? We need to think about public opinion, we need to think about perceptions. Then the other reason I'm a bit of an odd man out is that this past year, I served as an expert in the lawsuit against the Census Bureau regarding the addition of a citizenship question. I could spend the entire time up here talking about that and that experience, but I do want to step back and talk more generally a bit about the politics of census taking, although I'm happy to talk in Q&A about any of that. So when I speak on a panel and have limited amount of time, I like to kind of package my commentary in bite-sized take-home points. And so what I'd like to do is leave you with 3 points that I'll talk about in my comments. The first is that 2020 is unusual in terms of the political context in which the decennial will be conducted, but it's the case that the census is always political. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. The second point that I want to touch on is that public opinion, attitudes about the census really matter in terms of thinking about self-response and operations, but they're actually quite difficult to predict, and it creates a bit of a particular challenge in terms of thinking about how to develop a communications campaign to address some of the concerning attitudes right now. And then finally, I do want to say a few things about an addition of a citizenship question and the challenges that creates for 2020. So when we think about census politics right now, I suspect the thing that comes to mind is the citizenship question. It certainly has grabbed a lot of headlines. It's currently before the Supreme Court. There is little doubt, right, that 2020 has been politicized. This is from a fundraising campaign from the Trump campaign talking about the citizenship question. Just know that it's happening on the other side. There's a hashtag campaign, leave it blank, that progressives have been circulating on Twitter. So 2020 is politicized. But it's always, the census is always going to be political, and that's because the stakes are so high. Fundamentally, it's about power and money. A recent study just came out that estimated the total number of the federal funding spent in 2016 was actually exceeded 880 billion of dollars distributed on the basis of the 2010 decennial. So we're talking about a lot of money that is at stake. And then, of course, power is also at stake. The numbers will be used for apportioning the U.S. House of Representatives, which, of course, also is relevant for the Electoral College, based on trends in population movement. The estimate is that there's going to be 15 different states that will be losing or gaining seats in Congress on the basis of the 2020. Those are not equally distributed. The projections are that blue states are losing seats, red states are gaining seats, and these are projections that don't take into account the citizenship question. And the states probably most likely to be impacted by the citizenship question, California, New York, but also red states like Arizona and Texas. So it is every decennial is political because, again, the stakes are so high. But 2020 is one where politics is even more concerning in terms of the potential for politics to have an impact on the accuracy and completeness of the count. For one reason, it's going to be conducted in the midst of a presidential campaign. So 2000 was the last time that happened, and sure enough, something that seemed so boring as just counting people in the population became, part of the campaign discussion. And it seems almost with certainty that we will see that again, in part because we are already seeing it. The other thing that makes 2020 so concerning is the fact that the controversy surrounding the citizenship question, the process by which it has unfolded, has been it has been politicized not just in terms of some individuals in politics have criticized, but it has been folded into partisan politics. And while that is, there have been imbalances in the past in terms of how much one side or the other might be doing some of the criticism, what has been so surprising or disappointing this time around is that you have Republicans in red states that are likely going to lose seats as a result of adding the citizenship question, nonetheless supporting the addition. And so that partisan polarization is something that is particularly concerning for 2020. And of course, as everyone in this room knows, there were all of the challenges already going into the current context, decreased trust in government, concerns about data security, concerns about privacy and confidentiality. I thought it was potentially useful not just to plug my book that, when it first came out, I swear we sold like 3 copies. Like nobody wanted to read about the census, and suddenly it's become a little bit more popular. But I thought it was useful to draw some potential comparisons between 2000 and 2020 because I think they help to highlight the specific challenges for 2020. So in 2000, also a presidential election year, the census also became controversial. It was when there was still a long form, and it was the long form that was really the source of most criticism, concerns about the intrusiveness of questions on the long form. Then candidate George Bush said at one point that he didn't know if his household would fill out the long form if they received it. Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott instructed people that if they thought a question was a violation of their privacy to not fill it out. There's quite some irony, I think, in some of the messaging back then. But there were lots of Republicans who were very supportive of the census and recognized the importance of the long form. And again, that's, I think, one of the things that I worry about in terms of 2020 is just the extent to which, there has really polarized along partisan lines. The other thing is that the focus was really about privacy and privacy concerns. And certainly there was an impact. The research we did showed that those who were concerned about privacy were less likely to complete the form. There's lots of people in this room who have done research on similar topics, but it also affected item non-response, not just on those items where people thought that they were intrusive, but frankly it gave them an excuse to not answer other questions that were kind of burdensome. And the difference is that 2020 is less about privacy and it's more about confidentiality. This is a topic that my mentor and co-author and former director of the Census, Ken Pruitt, has been talking about for some time, is this distinction between privacy attitudes and confidentiality attitudes. The privacy concerns are the government doesn't have a right to ask that question. Right, that they shouldn't ask it. Confidentiality concerns are, I'm worried about what the government is going to do with the information they collect. So that's the don't tell. And 2020 is really about confidentiality, less than privacy. So the Census Bureau recognizes this. Their research that has been looking at census attitudes and motivators and barriers have really focused on and identified this concern, particularly among Latinos, but not just among Latinos and immigrants, that there is fear about what the government is going to do with the data. Certainly the Trump administration has not helped out with those confidentiality concerns, given their reluctance to reassure on Title 13. And you might think, okay, well, once we recognize that confidentiality is the issue, the barrier, we can just fix it, right? We can just implement a communication campaign that attempts to correct for those confidentiality concerns. Unfortunately, there is a number of reasons why I remain concerned about our ability to do that. One is that census attitudes are one of those things that, unlike kind of attitudes on abortion or attitudes on gun control, that are not really deeply held, right, or thought about a lot. People have low levels of knowledge and familiarity and experience with the census. And so as anybody who studies campaign effects will tell you, is like, number one, it is hard to change attitudes, and you gotta understand them first. And they're actually quite difficult to understand and predict. Research on privacy has long pointed to this thing called the privacy paradox, right? That people say, I'm really, really concerned about my privacy, and I'm not going to share my personal information, and then they sign up for Facebook and give it all away, right? So that there is this disconnect between people's attitudes and behaviors when it comes to privacy, that there is just it's more complex. It's harder to understand. And one of the things that I think leaves us a little bit unprepared is that so much of the research that has been done at the Census Bureau in measuring attitudes has really been disconnected from people's experiences with the census itself. And so, just asking general attitudes about federal statistics, what that means in terms of when people actually look at the screen and are asked to fill in their personal information, I think that we need to do more to figure out how that translates. The other thing I would point to is the possibility that actually privacy attitudes are in fact easier to overcome than confidentiality concerns. That appeals to community, that appeals to the benefits of the census might eventually convince someone who's like, the government doesn't have a right to ask that question, that it's worth going ahead and sharing that information. But if you are concerned about how your data are going to be used and if they could be used to deport you or your family member or a neighbor, right, that those are entirely different barriers to try and overcome. And so I think that creates a bigger challenge. And the final point I would make is just that in terms of studying communications effects and communication campaign effects, is that we just don't have enough research. Causality is really hard to tease out. It's something that academics and practitioners have been working on for quite some time. It's something that, coming out of 2010, I think the Census Bureau recognized in terms of the need to better understand communication effectiveness, and unfortunately, I think that Congress starving the Bureau over the last decade has potentially had consequences for being able to evaluate if the communications campaign will in fact be effective. Okay, so finally, just a couple things about the citizenship question. I refuse to call it the citizenship question because it's not the same question that was asked in 1950 when nativity started, and then there was a follow-up that if you were not born in the United States, you were asked citizenship. So a citizenship question, I think, being added to the decennial, as I suspect everyone in this room is aware, is likely to have implications for self-response. And I will say over the course of working on this lawsuit, I just kept this little diary of all the interesting research questions from an academic perspective that could be studied, and I'm glad to hear that the Census Bureau is doing an RCT to better understand it. But the question is, what do we do with that information, and is there time to incorporate it into how the Census Bureau conducts 2020. Some of the concerns are about reduced self-response. There's also about item non-response and break-offs. The finding that the mismatch between administrative records on citizenship status and self-report is quite inaccurate, is one that raises concerns about the accuracy of the information provided. And then finally is concern about how this entire process and the controversy itself affects attitudes, not just about the decennial, but about the Census Bureau generally and their other government surveys. I think another concern is the spillover effect, that there has been a real focus on how the citizenship question will impact non-citizens, but both from our research in 2000 and research in other areas, I think there's concerns that it will affect not only responses to just the citizenship question, but also other items on the decennial, as well as individuals beyond non-citizens. Again, thinking to the leave it blank hashtag, that's being driven not by non-citizens on Twitter, right? It's by white progressives on Twitter who are saying they're going to leave it blank. So the political motivations that might result in some of the effects, right, I think is something that we also have to take into account. And then finally, I think there is concern about what this means not only for the accuracy and completeness of the census, but also the census data products that many of us use in our research. The implications for what data products will be available with what level of noise and with what level of specificity is something that I think that the research community really needs to be engaging with the Census Bureau on before the decennial takes place. I think I'll end there and turn it over to Peter.
So can we make sure all the mics are on for everybody, because I'm going to start. We have 2 mics up here in the aisles. If you're interested in asking a question, please come up to one of these mics. While you're making your way there, if any of you are, I'd like to just to focus on a couple of things, a couple of comparisons between the Canadian census and the US Census. Patrice, I think I'm right about this, but tell me if I'm not, because my short-term memory may be going and I'm not. You do not have a citizenship question on the Canadian census, but you have it on the long form.
Oh, yes, yes. Yep.
You do not have it on the short form that goes to most people, right? So we have it, we used to have it on the long form, if I'm right, and we now have it on the ACS. Right?
Yes.
So, okay. So I just wanted to make sure we, because there have been some arguments that the UN recommends having a citizenship question on census form, and I just wanted to point out that Canada does not have one for most people. Second, you mentioned, Patrice, that you were attributing the success of the Canadian response rates to the wave methodology that you folks follow. If I look at what you do and what Jim presented, Jim has more waves than you do, and I think 2 more, and we come up with a lower result than you do. I'm wondering if there's something else about the Canadian experience that might explain the difference between the 2.
It's hard to tell. I guess it's a combination of all, like as I said, our communication strategy, we make it easy for respondents. We have, I'm not sure if you have a way for them to request a paper questionnaire?
No, there's no way to request the paper questionnaire. It will get to them if they don't complete the questionnaire online or over the phone.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess, I mean, the more...
So Canadians aren't just nicer people? I mean,
we're doing our census test right now, and if I could give you some examples of complaints we get at our census helpline, and it's not pretty. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, especially in the last census, there was a good vibe around the census. We just had a new government, and yes, census was political in Canada too. The previous government made the long form voluntary. The new government reintroduced the mandatory long form, and actually for many Canadians it was perceived as a good news, so that helped us. But yeah.
We have a couple questions, sir.
2 questions for Statistics Canada. The first one is, you've moved lots of people to take this online. How much money have you saved during that past? And the second question is, during that transition, have you had to worry about any type of fraudulent type of behavior with the online type of completion?
Oh, good question. I'm not the money guy here. I guess the best measure is the cost per dwelling. That cost is reducing from one census to the next. But in terms of like dollars, how much we're saving, to be honest, I'm not sure. But for sure, it reduces the cost per dwelling a lot. I guess that's the best I can answer. And in terms of what we do we have, respondents need a secure access code to log in, and as soon as we get run response with a secure access code, the code is blocked, and they cannot resubmit another form with that same access code. We have, and I'm not the money guy, and I'm not the IT guy either. But we have ways to make sure that, to monitor that and make sure. But of course, if there's I don't have examples, but if there was a campaign against the census and on social media, people were saying, oh, don't answer that question or answer a specific answer to a question, there's so much we can do, but so I don't really have examples on that. So I think we're good.
Ma'am.
This question is for Jim. So I just want to clarify that I understood you when you were talking about using the online version. Mm-hmm. When they enter their number, if they have their census ID, am I correct in understanding that they do not need to then verify their address?
Correct, because we have the link of the ID to the address, so we don't need it. It's only if they go in through what we call the non-ID path, then you provide your address so that we can match it back to our frame.
So my comment on that is that whenever we're asking humans to enter numbers, there's a possibility for error. So they could enter a wrong ID that is someone else's ID and proceed through the census and not have their answers linked to their address. So might there be an opportunity to at least do some sort of verification, have them enter the number twice, or have them do their address, because that seems like an easy error that could have very serious ramifications?
So the construction of the ID is just not numeric, it's alphanumeric, and it's 12 characters in length, and I can't go into the details, but there's a checking algorithm that goes along to ensure that it's a valid ID so that people just aren't generating IDs to try to get into the system.
No, sure, but what if they transpose a number? Could they get somebody else's?
The likelihood of getting someone else's is very, very small,
Okay.
because of the checks that are in along with the ID.
Okay, thank you.
There are billions and hundreds of billions of possible combinations.
When you look at the numbers and the character combinations, it's a huge number to be able to randomly hit an ID.
Dr. Santos.
Hello. Is this on? Hello? Hello? Yep.
Here he is.
Okay. A question for Sunshine. Given the brouhaha over this citizenship question, I actually consider that brouhaha as a treatment effect that cannot be walked back regardless of what decision comes out in a few weeks. So I wondered to what extent you shared that sentiment. And then a question for Jim on imputations, which is that at the end of the day, given the re-engineering of the whole process, yes, the workload reduction will be achieved for the NERFU enumerators, but won't that vastly increase the amount of whole person imputations among unresolved households?
So absolutely. I mean, in some ways, the damage, I think, comes not based on what the Supreme Court decides, but on the basis of it being proposed in the first place. And I should be clear that, you know, I think, there are a number of countries that include citizenship on their census. The Census Bureau obviously asks about citizenship in many of their products. I think one of the most damaging parts was simply the process by which it unfolded.
So as related to the imputation, the reduction of the non-response follow-up workload by using administrative data, it's multiple sources of information that we've been able to match to ensure that for that particular address, we believe that those people live in that address. So it's not just imputing, it's not just dropping in a population count and then imputing the characteristics. It's dropping in characteristics with the people also. So it's not just simple, we know there's 4 people there, that's what we go forward with.
Yes, but the high-quality imputations in the NERFU, I thought were just for the predicted occupied housing units that didn't respond after one enumerator visit, which means you still have to go through all the rest of the addresses. And at the end of the day, there's always unresolved cases. And those are the ones that I was wondering about.
Oh, so the unresolved cases are the ones that we have usually a very small percentage where we get either proxy data or last resort information for them that go into the imputation methodology. Either we get minimal content for the people through the proxy interviewing, or we get sometimes just a population count. That's usually a very small percentage of the overall population where we don't actually get some kind of verified information in the field.
But I think Rob's point is that this number is going to go up. That is to say, it's usually very small. He's arguing that the NERFU operation is not going to capture a lot of people, and the number you need to impute will go up. But you don't agree with this?
I don't. One of the phenomena that we also saw in the our 2018 end-to-end test in the non-response operation is when we went out and we did our first visit and non-response follow-up, we left a notice on the door, a notice of visit, which had information about who we were, what we were doing there to complete the form. It provided the census ID for the case and information about either calling our 800 numbers or to go online. We saw a bump in our self-response rate during non-response follow-up as a result of that activity. And people realized that we were serious about getting the collection. They didn't want us coming back, so they went online and completed the form or called our telephone questionnaire assistance areas to complete it. We saw an uptick in calls and we saw an uptick in internet. The great thing about having the handheld the smartphone technology for NERFU, once we receive that case, we can then pull the case from non-response follow-up and we're done with it once we know that we have good data. So we have that dynamic work ability with the non-response follow-up workload.
Susan.
Hi. Jim, two questions. On the group quarters, how do you give the census to an apartment that has more than one family in it? Like in California, we have more than one family living in apartments, number one. Number two, on the citizenship question, on your trial questionnaire about that question, are you looking at different placement of where you put that question? Because I'm thinking if you put it at the end, maybe all the other questions will be answered, and that one could be blank, or have maybe a control of having this is a volunteered question, you don't have to answer it or something like that, so that you will increase the response rate.
Yes, so I forgot your first question, which was?
Group quarters.
Group quarters. So housing units that have multiple families living in them, apartments, those aren't considered group quarters. Those are considered housing units. And when we deliver or mail materials to them, the residence rule instructions inform them to complete everybody who's living or staying at that address as of April 1st. So our goal is to try to ensure that both families are being enumerated on the form. We know that is a challenge for some people for a lot of reasons, and one of the things that we try to do is through our partnership efforts, our community-based partnership efforts, is to reach into those communities where it's hard to count those kinds of living situations, to get people to recognize the importance of completing the form. In addition, in our communication efforts, with our ability to target where we believe there might be areas that have those kinds of living situations, is to try to, as part of our communication efforts, is to try to stress the importance of counting everyone in your household, even though they may be in a complex living situation.
So on one census form, or two, or different forms?
I forget I think it's 10 people on the paper questionnaire, but on the internet form, or if you call our telephone questionnaire assistance program, you can put up to 99 people on the form. Yeah. So we have a large ability to do that. As far as the test that we're doing that's going into the field actually in about a month, We're not testing the placement. The citizenship question is the last question for each person panel. It's the last one that's asked after the other demographic information. And we're just testing the forms with and without it to see the effect on the self-response rate for both internet, paper, and telephone, and as well as overall. And we stratified the sample. It's a fairly large sample. It's 480,000 housing units broken into two. And we stratified it looking at high foreign-born areas and areas that have low response rates, typically low response rates, to try to understand where those impacts might be.
Okay.
Sir. Oh, ma'am. Both of you. No.
Yes. So my first question, and I have two, as a Californian, I'm also concerned about this multiple dwelling issue as far as capturing, especially in communities of color, because of the number of families that are living. And so I think she's asked the question, but I guess to further that question, we're seeing very large bouts of homelessness, and they're not organized organizations that are actually tracking these homeless persons, and so it's being a burden on the religious community especially in Northern California, to do this. And so my question first is, what is the census planning to do to be able to target these areas where there's high homelessness and there's not organized, there's not these larger organizations that are bearing the load for these persons? And so that's my first question. And then my second question for Sunshine is that the census has been political from the beginning, right? The census was one of the biggest reasons for needing a census was to then deal with the slavery question of 3/5, right? So this idea that the census is not political or that it's apolitical, I just think is foolishness from the beginning. So with that being said, what can be done in a grandscaping kind of lens to make sure that messaging is always there as a political operative, to ensure and tell other people that this is a part of your own citizenship, right? This is a part of being an active participant in your government by taking, not only just voting, but then participating in the census.
Jim first, I guess.
Sure. So for the homeless situation, there's sort of a variation on that. First of all, it's considered not as part of the housing unit activity, it's part of our group quarters activity. So it's under that large umbrella. And group quarters isn't just one operation, it's multiple operations that fit under it, because we deal different procedures for different kinds of group quarters living situations. So the first thing is people who don't normally have a home, they're not homeless, but they're more transient. People who live in a mobile home and they move around the country. We have an operation called enumeration at transitory locations, where we go out to those locations and we interview and enumerate the people there. It's usually during a very tight window to get them, so in case they're moving around a lot, so we don't overcount. The other piece of it is about people who aren't in that situation but are experiencing homelessness and may be either staying at areas where they get services like food, beds, those kinds of things. Or there may be areas where we know that underneath this bridge there's a tent camp or something that people. We try to identify those locations, both the service-based as well as these other areas, and work through our partnership efforts with community areas to identify the locations, and then we go out in almost like a blitz operation and attempt to enumerate the people that are in those kinds of situations. Yeah, so it's part of the census processes.
So to follow up with that, is there something that my area needs to do, right? So the reason that I'm speaking is I'm on the board of my church, and we are in a housing effort for homeless people, and we participate in a nomadic shelter program with many other churches. Do we need to sign up? Do we need to?
So I would direct you to the Census Bureau website. There's a partnership thing there that you can link in to find out your partnerships. The other thing is we have a regional office in Los Angeles that you could get in contact there. If you can't find your local partnership person, and we're hiring partnership specialists now through the end of June, so there may not be someone in your area at this point, but there will be. If you contact our regional office in Los Angeles, which covers all of California, they can get you in contact with the people that are locally in your area. And because there's faith-based work we do, there's all kinds of different communities that we work with, partners.
Sunshine.
So, you know, you're absolutely right. And I would say that one of the things that I observed in my 6 years on CSACs is that Census Bureau has worked so hard to be nonpartisan. And that's critical and it's important. But my view as a political scientist is that part of being able to maintain your nonpartisan credentials is to keep your thumb on the pulse of politics, right? And that sometimes I do think that the Bureau could do a better job of keeping their pulse on on politics. And I would say right now, the strongest advocates for the Census Bureau are corporations who depend on the data. It's Republican pollsters who depend on the data. I have long thought that part of my concern with how the citizenship question has evolved is that this is somehow going to benefit the Democrats because, right, we're going to count the immigrants. When in fact, right, this impacts. It impacts red states. It impacts rural areas. I think it's so important that advocates for the census are coming from, both sides of the aisle. And again, like I think my biggest fear in seeing this unfold is how many Republicans I think have not ended up kind of standing up for the Census Bureau.
Sir, last question.
I was going to ask about homelessness and how those were counted, so thank you, and thank you, Jim. But Patrice, maybe you can expound on the Canadian experience with how we count homeless people in the census, or if we do.
Yeah, I mean, we have similar challenges and similar processes for our group quarters. So yeah, these transient populations are part of our group quarters methodology. Yeah, so it's similar, small differences, but the overall approach is the same.
Awesome.
Madam Chair, did you want to ask a question? I shouldn't cut you off. No, you're good? Okay. Thanks to everyone for coming, and I appreciate the speakers giving us their expertise today.